giving my ideas of how to change a hospital, because personally, I have never actually, I was in hospital maybe a couple of days when I was giving birth, that's it. And so it was a very unpleasant experience. I don't want to come back, and I'm afraid of hospitals, so I'm not in a position of coming up with ideas of how to like, you know, change it for better. But yeah, but it's will be.
Yeah, I try to avoid the places myself. In all my memories of hospitals are actually, yeah. It occurred to me once that that's what horror movies are actually about. You know, like the action movies are about the moment of violence, and horror movies are about like all the stuff that, you know, takes place in the hospitals afterwards. It's sort of slow, painful, miserable, hopeless, terrifying aspects of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I quite like hospitals. I don't know. I don't want to someone else speak, but I quite like hospitals.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of people die in the last 5 years in hospitals, but you know what? It was quite dignified deaths, you know, and there were people around them, and there was lots of people. There were loved people around them, and you know, it was you know, death is death, but it wasn't. It wasn't that bad, you know. And I quite like them in that way. I've stayed in the hospital a couple of times, and once, yeah, when my life was quite, you know, I had encephalitis. I had a really bad brain kind of virus thing, and stayed in for a couple of weeks, and it was a big relief for me actually, because I was living quite hand to mouth at the time. So to have somewhere where I could heal, and the only thing going on was just healing, was really nice. So I quite like them, to be honest. I quite like, you know, sitting in the cafe or just going into the crap WH Smiths that they have and looking at the magazines.
Yeah.
You know, I do.
Which ones are better? I'm from America. Yeah. So all different series of associations.
I mean, yeah. I really guess that within the system that we are made to live in, everything kind of fits in, because it's a huge mass incarceration all around us. I don't want to sound like Foucault, but you know, it's a huge mass incarceration of a life that we are living. We are so alienated to the nature and everything, and therefore for us to keep going, and I guess that's the case in the UK with the NHS and all that, the health system is becoming much worse and worse, and it is becoming only maybe better for those who are, you know, who are more worth it because of their money or status or their youth, you know, and all others are becoming more and more indisposable. And so therefore, of course, the whole, I mean, we need to take not hospitals on their own, but like hospitals in terms of the whole relationship of the system with one another, you know. And I guess there are a lot of good people in, of course, all these institutions, you know, who are trying to make people's lives better and etc. But I guess this is not what we're talking about here. You know, I sometimes feel like when I was translating Sociology of Freedom by Abdullah Öcalan into English, I really felt like one of those, you know, like the cattle farms, the pig farms, or the chicken farms, you know, that we were also in one of those, you know, those who had better status, much more money, maybe had a better life, but at the end, our lives are so constricted, restricted, you know, and I guess together with that, our imaginations are also so much more limited, you know, like in days like this, you know, COVID-19, there's a lot of things going on all around the world. There's a lot of exposure of what this state mechanism is, you know, but together with it, not only just exposing it, but like, how do we imagine, a different way of living, where do we begin with? How do we actually begin to undo, the way that after thousands of years of patriarchal and exploitative regimes, where do we begin to undo it so that we can imagine another way of living, another way of healthcare, like if we didn't all work like this, would we need hospitals like that? If we didn't have such huge metropolitan cities, would we need hospitals like that? I don't know. The questions can go on and on and on, I guess. So, the whole thing, our lives, has been taken out of context and put into a context where we are just, working to make profit instead of enjoying it somehow. I mean, usually the city for us is, especially when we were young, was made out to be the fun place, the place where everything is going on, and of course, after a certain number of years, you realize, I mean, okay, there are some good stuff that are going on, but it's also the very center of exploitation, like to the full, so I guess, what is fun, what is joy, what is enchantment? I think there's a lot of room, especially these days, for rethinking all this, rethinking of the cities anew, like if we need to, do we take, does New York have to be the way it is? Does London have to be the way it is? I'm in Cologne at the moment. I mean, come and see Cologne at the moment. You'd think, what's going on here, But does it have to be the way it is, Or is it like this because of certain interests and profits and etc.? So I think, instead of making this the way that we are living more bearable, more tolerable, because this is what they are telling us, if we have more money, we can find it more tolerable, but we are seeing with the destruction of our ecology that this is also not going to be so much possible anymore for anybody. I sometimes think maybe the search for immortality starting from Gilgamesh is really coming to its end. This 1% that is ruling over us, their search for immortality is happening through just exploiting, making more money, ruling more deeper, more profoundly, is really coming to an end, because I really think it's been exposed so much more. I don't know, maybe it's me, I feel I know a lot more than I used to, and I can see a lot of different groups all around the world struggling, different movements, women, Kurds, Black people, Asian people, whatever, everyone, the workers, etc. So, I really feel that this is really the moment to begin to say, okay, how am I not going to be a complicit to this? Like, do I really need to become a worker or or work whatever, wherever it is? It doesn't have to be in a factory, but in any way that upholds this civilization, the way that we do. And the next question is, of course, how do we then sustain ourselves? How do we do all this? Because if we do not enter this kind of discussion, I really think that our imagination cannot bump into then the realization of our imagination and continuously, become nearer to freedom, and the joy and the enchantment that we should get from life, So So, you know, I think of that for myself, and of course the practice in Rojava and elsewhere around Kurdistan is really, you know, orientated towards this. Like, how do we decouple ourselves from this way of life of this patriarchal civilization?
Mm.
And, you know, we need to do this at all levels, you know, at a personal level to regional levels, etc. So how do we actually do that? And it's a huge, you know, horizon when you think of that. It means the health, of course, sector. It means arts. It means education. It means self-defense. You know, we are seeing that, of course, the moment that you say, okay, I want to live differently, then the coercion mechanisms of the state come into play. You know, how do we then find ways of, you know, defending ourselves so that how do we open space, and how do we actually do that? You know, I really love what Öcalan was saying for Europe. He was saying that in the West there's a partial peace between the rulers and the workers, women, you know, all the oppressed, because of that incredible struggle that was given here. So the partial peace means that there were some rights that were gained, you know, etc. But in the last, you know, 20 to 30 years, we're seeing that this partial peace is also collapsing in many different ways. So it is possible in many different ways to do all this. Therefore, you know, I am thinking of health in that sense. You know, like in Rojava, there are many different approaches to health. You need to take precautionary health, for example. Like, you know, I mean, if I go personal, I have a back problem because I sit a lot, and I guess this is not good for humans, right? So therefore, you know, there is room for all different approaches to health, beginning with the way that we are living and why we are living the way we are living. So, you know, shortly, I want to talk about that. And I think it's a moment where we cannot just be satisfied with a few reforms here and there, but really then take this moment, which is the accumulation of 100 years of struggles all around the world, to steer a different civilization, our civilization, what Öcalan calls democratic civilization.
Okay, so yeah, thank you. I actually wanted to ask personally, I don't know anything about how hospital and healthcare exist in Rojava now. Maybe if you can, yeah, it will be interesting to.
I think David would know a little as well because he was there.
Yeah, well, I mean, at first there was a medical blockade, so it was a lot of things had to be reinvented just because a lot of the machines in hospitals, like with the spare parts, they couldn't get spare parts, so things broke down. So like things like dialysis patients, they just had to get them out of there. But as a result, they had to reconceive a lot of things. And when I was there, they were just starting to think about how to reorganize cities. And there was this guy we kind of referred to as the hippie doctor, because he looked like this very serious sort of military officer sort of guy. But when he started talking, he was saying how, well, we're really thinking of preventative health as being the focus, because I'm convinced that, most heart disease and probably a lot of cancer really ultimately goes back to stress, and a lot of that has to do with urban environments being inherently stressful. And, it's like, if I'm not around a tree at all for like 3 or 4 hours, I start to get really stressed. And, we need to rebuild the cities as maybe 40 to 60% green space. And I tell you, heart disease, like a lot of different, things are just going to go down immediately, which of course they have an opportunity to do a lot of rebuilding. So then a lot of the And I know that in places like Kobani, you know, since most of the city was destroyed anyway and had to be rebuilt, they tried to actually enact some of this, like redesign the city around the idea of creating a more healthy and less stressful environment. But yeah.
Yeah, I think like now we will invite Elena to talk about socialism and capitalism, but personally, live through perestroika and 90s in Russia, I'm very suspicious about all alternative medicine and trees, because during the 90s, when the basically normal social services were mostly dismantled and most of the population become very poor, people like started to use extrasens, drinking their urine, holding the trees, because they can't do anything else, you know. So I was like, no way, if you don't have like machines, so what can you do? You just say, okay, I'm unstressed myself.
Access to the machines at that moment. I mean,
I think, you know, like we know a lot now from that experience as well, from the Soviet experience, you know. Therefore, you know, what we're trying to say is that it's a whole. It's all about just traditional medicine. You know, I think the modern medicine has also its place. But what we are saying is that, you know, most of the illnesses that are happening is due to the way that we are oppressed and exploited and we are made to live, you know. So I guess, you know, this is why I was saying that there are different, there's room for all these medicines that we're talking about, you know. I mean, you know, working in concrete blocks, you know, from early morning to the evening, and then being in surroundings, or even, you know, our apartments are so perfect. I mean, I began with saying, you know, I feel like in an animal farm, you know. I mean, to minimize this socialization, we all enter, you know, from one single door into our homes, and then we are isolated, you know, in there. And it comes to such a point that we find comfort in this now. It's amazing, you know. We find a strange comfort in being alienated now, because I see people sometimes being even scared of pigeons, you know, on the street. No, really, I mean, it's shocking, but this is the case, you know. So what I'm saying is that I think health and healthcare is so intertwined with the general enchantment of the way that we are living, being fulfilled with what we're doing in life, you know, the meaning of life, you know. So, and for all this to happen, I guess that we need to continuously struggle, because as in the Soviet example, you know, there is always a way where this domination can, of course, take over, you know. So therefore, I think a mechanism where there's a continuous struggle of undoing what we have learned is very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Visual assembly, and then okay. Yeah, maybe it occurs to me that I don't know the composition. I'm looking at the group of who actually knows how much people know of the background of the concept of visual assembly and how much of it needs to be explained. But just seems wise to just give a brief intro of the idea, and maybe Nico could talk a little bit about the background.
Yeah, and then we go with like Lena.
Yeah, no, I think Javier framed the broader issues so well. I don't have to do that. So I could bounce off yours. I have some thoughts, but I'll talk about this later. Yeah, just about the visual assembly concept itself. You know, it is, as most of you I suspect know, it's an idea which is meant to combine artistic tools and sort directly democratic tools, and at the same time to combine virtual and physical. So that's what's really innovative about it. So we have people who are spending lots and lots of time online and endless Zoom chats and conversations, and they always kind of spin around and don't seem to get anywhere often. At least a lot of us have had the experience, these sort of endless talking shops. But part of the reason why it's hard to have something come out of it is simply because there's nothing physically there to focus on. When you're doing consensus process, there's always an object. There's an action. A problem you're trying to solve. And one thing that we thought would be very interesting, if we're trying to unleash the imagination, and the assumption is, there has been a kind of, as Hafiz was saying, this sort of war on the imagination. I've said it as well. This is kind of the imagination strikes back. We've lost the ability to think in utopian terms. So we're trying to rebuild that. Well, one idea was to have a something actually concrete to facilitate the imaginative process, where the artist wouldn't actually be imposing their vision at all. So the idea is that we have a series of stencils which are collectively created, and then the artists are simply sitting there in a physical space, whereas a group of people in virtual space collectively imagine what an alternative institution, a city, health system, whatever it might be, would be like. And then we use these artistic tools to sort of arrange things in space on a physical place, like in a public square, if we can get away with that, in a garage if we have to. So the image of this place, which is being transformed, will be put online, and people perhaps all over the world can watch as it they're collectively creating something in real space in real time.
Yeah, and of course, so this, maybe we should share now the screen and show.
I think we're no longer host. So
Okay.
Share screen. Maybe we can. Maybe host disabled attendee screen sharing. No. Well, here, I know. Maybe I can put it into the chat.
No, I think we should ask Ty. No, because I want you to be on the screen.
Yeah.
Can you either give us back the? Can you give us back the hosting rights, please? Hello?
Is Ty even there? Hello.
He's on the phone.
Oh, is that?
Sorry. I have enabled sharing, multiple participants.
Okay, that's good.
You should be able to screen share now.
Share screen.
So we wanted to, since our
there it is.
Since our today agenda is come up with a list of stencils and figure out facilitation, and now we will go through the list of other ideas with Elena and David and other people. So I just wanted to show what an example of what it could be like. So this map is a map of St. Marie Hospital that we chose as the place in London that we can reimagine. And the things around is from our previous visual assembly of City of Care that we did with David and Extinction Rebellion and Art Strike guys. So the idea is like this space around.
Somebody might want to mute.
Yeah.
Go on.
So this circles.
Instead of a grid, which might prejudice people's imagination, Nika got the idea of simply having these circles to substitute for a grid.
Yeah, and so the circles could be what Javin was talking, and maybe other people will be talking about what could be a preventive care, which is, for example, in Germany, where I lived for a while, is a big deal, and you can get insurance pay for so many things. If you like stop smoking, they will help you, and so on and so forth. In the US, it virtually doesn't exist. In Soviet Union, it also was widespread, and you can go to like resorts that could be paid if you have some conditions and so on. So I was thinking that if we have the list of stencils, we can design them and cut them out, or put them online for download for anybody who wants, and anybody also can add their own version of the stencils, and then we can plan kind of separately and together these two zones. One is hospital itself, in which you have many rooms, many, I don't know, territories. You can put, you can write down what could it be here, can put in instructions, and then the circles could be some other place of care. That's, yeah, that is for us to invent. And as like maybe then Ty could describe our plan about how to implement it. So we were thinking to have 2 teams.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
This is what we came up with in the last meeting.
Yeah, one in front of the hospital, where we can try to do it, like very openly, and then the backup team in our Portobello Road Square.
Right, yeah, so there'd be the advanced team, which would try to do it in front of St. Mary's, and if security...
Oh, so, sorry.
What are you
Right,
doing?
right. I just wanted to come back to the
But then you just go to stop share.
Oh, okay.
There. Yeah, and the idea would be presumably St. Mary's security will kick us out, but it's worth a try, right? And if they do, then we'll have another team that can do the same thing around here in Portobello. Everybody seems to think it's lovely if you start, painting on the street. So there will be no problem. And since the people are mainly in virtual space and the art, who is applying the stencils doesn't matter because it's the people creating the thing. You could just have 2 teams. It wouldn't matter which one actually ends up doing it.
Yeah, and so I just want to add two points to this description of the visual assembly that is important for me. One is that it's enabled people like me, who is not native speakers in English. For me, it's quite difficult still to speak English. I'm making mistakes, but I'm a visual person, and yeah, it's much more easy for me to imagine how it will look like. And the same for kids, for most of the kids and migrants. And the second thing is that visual assembly looks like it will be very easy and cheap to implement. So you don't need any permissions, most likely. We can have these meetings on Zoom endlessly, but we also can do public art projects with not a lot of permissions if we don't want to be it permanent. Yeah, so that's it. And then maybe we can ask Elena to talk.
Oh, yes. Let's do that. Is she
Lena?
here?
Well, I have to unmute myself. Well, I'm kind of, look, this is my first time on this virtual meeting, and I probably misunderstood what was expected of me. So I'm now, well, trying to back off from speaking because, well, what I was going to say is something else entirely. But just one very brief thing. As Nika mentioned the Soviet experience and someone else. And of course, I remember how, well, when the Soviet Union was disintegrating and we all were, this liberal intelligentsia and anti-communist party, and of course, and that. And now, well, I live in the United States. And of course, it is 30 years after the end of socialism. And I just, I can say that the farther I am from Soviet socialism, the better I think of it. And of course, there can be these 2 things. Of course, there's nostalgia, certain kind of nostalgia. We were young, our parents were alive, etc. But then at the same time, I think, well, good God, because well, these are the 2 realities that I compare: Soviet socialism and then the American reality, well, that I have here outside, well, of the building I'm now in. So I'm, thinking about, well, how many things were actually good and how things were available and how they were organized the way that you felt not just entitled, but you didn't even give it a thought. You said, well, of course, there are all these groups for children, there are all these music schools, and of course it should be free, and child care should be free, and etc. So what I wanted to say today, but I was thinking in terms of not healthcare, but I was thinking in terms of care. Well, I see the way these things are organized as, well, these are the questions, not just of healthcare or care. These are the questions of the whole social and political system, how the society is to be organized, for how resources are to be distributed through market or through policy. And of course, we understand there are several versions of the market, and there are several versions of policy, and there are mixed models, and all that. But well, these are the issues. Well, now when I see all these Black Lives Matter rallies, and you know, and people are trying to do something. And for example, students at the department where I work, they came up with this idea they want to do something because the issue of social justice is burning inside them. And they came up with this petition or something, well, that students of color and Black people and African Americans should be treated, well, somewhat differently than other students. And this is such a, well, a difficult issue, of course, because how can you treat students differently? Well, we do, but you know, this of course is a very ambiguous and gray zone. But I can see that people are trying to do something. People are trying to come up with a solution, and this solution are, well, let's take this step. Let's take this step. Let's train police better. Let's, well, change this. But well, there's not much conversation, or the conversation is too general about how society should be organized. How, well, when I say society, I mean the model of resource distribution, how resources need to be organized, how resource distribution need to be organized on a grand scale. So for me, well, this is really very much a conversation about, well, capitalism or socialism, and well, how we change it really on this big level. That's mostly it.
Mm. Yeah, disentangle. You're keeping it to scale. This is going to be difficult. Really, to have a healthy health system, you need a healthy civilization. It's a theme that keeps coming out. So how do we confine what we do to a limit that?
Yeah, because you know, if you that's is always problem for everybody. If you cannot like, if you cannot change the whole society, what is why bother trying to change small policies? Nothing gonna. It's not a matter in any case.
But yes, I mean, I guess the spirit in which we're doing this is, imagine the accompanying institutions or whatever would be appropriate. You know, like imagine we have total power. We're just thinking about how we're going to do this component.
Yeah. In this case, maybe we can. I see Debbie here, and Debbie is talking about local municipalism, and this is an attempt to actually change something from the ground up. Right away. Debbie, are you here?
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, here I am. Sorry. You know, I think that the questions about sort of capitalism, socialism are obviously very important, but I also think that one of the things that's really important and that this tool allows us to do is to make, you know, begin. I mean, when I say capitalism and socialism, what I mean is whether you're talking about capitalism or you're talking about socialism, the question of changing the whole society and all the ways that all these things are interrelated is, of course, very important. But I think that what's exciting about this sort of imaginary, this form of this tool that you guys are working with here, is that it also allows us to start thinking about how to build something new, kind of in the shell of the old. You know, it's that whole dual power thing. And one of the things that's become very clear, you know, from anarchist movements and municipalist movements is that we have to start. We can't wait. I mean, of course we want these big moments, Black Lives Matter, all these things are very important, Occupy. But what this tool does is it allows us to be ready for those moments, to start really making the changes, both mentally, as you know, which Haben sort of talked about too, I'm sure, as part of this whole, you know, Kurdish project, is to kind of change your whole mentality, as they say, but also, you know, in a very concrete way to really allow ourselves to free ourselves, and also to think about, I always like to talk about it as a sort of a third pole. You know, it's not necessarily, it's neither capitalism, it's not socialism, it's maybe not even anarchism. You know, it's something else that we're putting together that allows us to really think sort of beyond traditional political categories, and that in the process of doing it, to actually doing it, working collectively, we kind of help, we transform ourselves in the very process. It allows us, it frees us to think differently, it frees us to come up with literal, you know, physical alternative structures, and also to just to become different people, you know, and that there's a whole dialectical process. The more we sort of engage in this way and practice this practice, the more we're able to sort of to bring new ideas, and also to do this really completely differently, and to implement some of these things, you know, either in that way that we're doing right now with mutual aid things, co-ops, and all this sort of alternative health things. And also, you know, that it gives us those tools so that when the moment comes, when we can sort of claim spaces, that we're ready to do that. So, you know, I just wanted to say that. And the other thing that I would add is, you know, when we were speaking of Rojava, I just think it's also, you know, they are doing this kind of, in a certain sense, imaginary work. One of the things that, for example, you know, the Make Rojava Green Again groups are doing is they're literally going out and planting trees, you know. So these kinds of models, I think, can be really helpful for groups worldwide, you know. They're going out, they planted 20,000 saplings, and now they're creating, and one of the things that they really want to do is to help sort of fix up, you could say, an existing refuge that was really damaged in war, but where people who have been fighters in the YPG and YPJ, you know, can go and kind of be in nature and kind of heal themselves. So, you know, all of those things, I think that whole holistic approach is very important, and that this is an exciting tool for that.
I have a question to you, and maybe to somebody else who can, maybe David can also advise. How can we facilitate these vast meetings of imagine if we come, so when it's come to actually do a visual assembly, let's say we have a stencils, we have a teams, we're preparing that, but then we will need to have some plan, like, you know, how do we vote, or do we come to a consensus?
What process are we using, and how does the facilitation operate?
Specifically, if we're talking about healthcare system, where we have people who actually working in that system day to day. As I said, I don't have anything to do with hospitals. I don't know how to run it. So I cannot even, I would be afraid to push my agenda, like to my ideas, because maybe it's a life and death issues, could be, like, if you arrange it incorrectly. So how to do that?
You know, I'm sorry that Kelly isn't on this call, and I don't know, I had the feeling she had planned to be, but maybe she didn't get the time exactly or something. I'm not an expert in this, in facilitation, and as you know, part of the municipalist concept is that, you know, people sort of meet in smaller groups and then scale up, you know, there's this sort of a spokesperson who's a delegate of the group. And so I don't really know, you know, I'm not an expert in facilitation. And if you do have hundreds of people doing this, you obviously have to have a mechanism. And I would say that mechanism is something that really should be explored, maybe like by a working group.
Exactly.
But maybe there are other people who have, you know, more concrete ideas maybe on this call. I don't even know who's on the call exactly. So.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of people here. Hi, cheers. I'm going to butt in. I think maybe we should start taking hands. I know Fabian's got his hand up. Thanks, Fabian. I know maybe we should start taking some hands. We have got a few people here that work with the NHS and have a lot to say, I think. So let's start hearing from other people, because we've been there for quite a while now. And we have some real concrete decisions we need to make. One of the things, I think, from all that discussion, one of the questions we were talking about last time was, we were first talking about a hospital, redesigning a hospital, and then we were talking about kind of cottage hospitals in different places, and the kind of decentralization of healthcare and what that might look like. So that's something we talk about. I think we've started to talk about facilitation, so maybe we should start taking comments on that from the floor, please. So I know Fabian had his hand up, and then Lemmy, you've got your hand up. So maybe we'll hear from Fabian first.
Okay. When you were speaking, it made me think of people familiar with the Preston model. It's a particular approach to municipalism that's been developed in Preston in northwest England. And they've used a lot of experience from Cleveland. Their councillors go over to Cleveland. And one of the key things that they were trying to bring together was the local council, the local university, and the local hospital as three big institutions. They call them anchor institutions. And then one of the first things they started to do was, instead of outsourcing the cleaners to these big corporations, setting up workers' co-ops to provide cleaning services, which would cover council buildings, university buildings, and hospital buildings. And to try and develop that as a local economy, so that actually it's feeding back, not just in terms of healthcare, in terms of how the economy functions, in terms of how education functions in an integrated approach. So one of the questions I would say on this is, some of the work has already been started. And it's a case of, if we're able to link up with those people and maybe have some input from them, then I think there is a lot of groundwork that's been done. And I think in the context of the economic impact of the pandemic, I think that will open the door to more people wanting that sort of approach, rather than what we've got here in the UK is Boris Johnson basically wanting to give contracts out to the same usual road building elite and everything like that. So really, I think part of it is seeing where there's a compatible approach being developed and drawing people in, rather than trying to make us, as though we've just arrived at some of these issues, find out what's been done elsewhere before, and then try and link up with that and that sort of connectivity. And then see, in terms of facilitation, what they've been doing in Preston's been going on for a few years now. So learn from their experience.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Fabian. Lemmy wanted to speak. Lemmy?
Yeah, am I audible, you guys?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Nice. So yeah, amazing inputs here from everyone. Firstly, hi folks. Like, if we are talking about the next couple of hours, like this particular event, I think, like personally, I believe one way to proceed would be to like model ourselves into like multiple stakeholders of all of the possible groups that might be involved in like running in a hospital. And then we can, like, after we've done that, we can use our insights and knowledge we've gained like throughout our lifetimes and like put it into use in these stakeholder groups maybe. So there might be the patients, the doctors, the nurses, all the other non-medical staff, and then the janitors and the all the technicians and all of these, like, you get the feel, right? So, and then there'll be healthy people in the community who don't have to visit the hospital, but still it's a integral part of their community. And so just modeling ourselves, like splitting ourselves into various groups and proceeding from there. All of this is under the assumption that we're discussing what to do in the next couple of hours. I might be totally wrong, but yeah. So thanks for
brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Good suggestion. Yeah, nice idea. We'll think about that in a sec. I've got Havin waiting to speak there. Sorry, Havin, you're muted.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair.
Okay. I said that I really appreciate what Lemmy has said, because I totally agree with him. I think then what one has to do is place this hospital in a setting where different parts of the society can also be in dialogue with it. So there is, first of all, the hospital within itself, One could think of it like an assembly model as well, you know, not just one executive of managers running it, but actually, you know, where doctors, nurses, cleaners, and other people who are taking part in day-to-day running of this hospital and involve them with bettering the services of the hospital, I guess, and also the patients too, of course, you know. And together with this, maybe if we had a city council, you know, or a city assembly, then hospitals could also take part in these assemblies. And then, you know, outside also can have some input, or the hospital can have an input back into the society as well, I guess. So, you know, women, for example, the workers, the doctors, the nurses can also within themselves, because if we are looking at eliminating several different contradictions or problems or conflicts or exploitational issues that come up, then, you know, organizing it in such a way that you both give a better healthcare, but also remove the problems that may result from other issues that come up. So I completely agree with Lemmy that in places like this, making it as local as possible, you know, so that people are responsible towards one another, and organizing the different people who are working in a hospital would be very important.
Yeah, it's actually, yes, assembly.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, yeah, it's great. So the hospital should be organizing as an assembly. That's so obvious, and it's probably should be part of the architecture. You know, this big space should be available for everybody to meet and discuss. And now, like this map of the hospital that I was using, it looks like a factory. It's like, you know, all these rooms and hallways, and yeah, it's designed as a factory. But maybe we can ask Glenn to comment on that. Is it how
I've got one hand up. Sorry, are you opening it to the floor? Because I've got one hand up. Nouri has got a hand up.
Huh?
Would like to speak.
Oh, okay. I don't see.
All right, yeah. Cheers, Nouri. Unmute yourself.
Okay, hi. Yes, what was mentioned just reminded me of a couple people I met from Exarchia. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The zone. Yes, the autonomous zone in Athens. And I recall he mentioned, and of course I may be misremembering, and we just mentioned it quickly, is that speaking of assemblies, there was a sort of, as we might term it, crowdsourced healthcare, where people who had some sort of illness would speak to a bunch of people who were gathering, some of whom were medical professionals, about their illness and getting, you know, thoughts, input from the group. And this might dovetail with the whole assemblies idea, where it's not just medical professionals. The medical professionals, as I understand, were actually trying to, you know, undermine their monopoly on knowledge by participating in this. And many people found it very therapeutic just to talk about their problems and get the sympathies and the help from other people. And I don't know that, what, you know, that all the input necessarily was high quality. Like, you know, some of it might have been questionable. Some of it might have been like, yeah, use a crystal. I'm sure it'll be fine. But whatever the case is, it had its own therapeutic benefits and probably overall informed people more in the sense of, you know, you hear about afflictions and you hear what other people think about these things, and you just can't help but, I assume, get some expertise on the matter. So that might be, might dovetail well with the idea of assemblies.
I was going to say, since no one's missed their hand up, another thing we need to think about, though, is division of labor, because, I mean, there's Michael Albert's famous point that if you try to create a directly democratic institution, which is an assembly model where there's a strict division of labor between people who are doing admin and people who are actually doing care or manufacture, whatever it is they're doing, and people who are doing the maintenance. So for people have such completely different forms of knowledge that you reproduce the hierarchies anyway. So he said the only way to make a truly democratic institution is to try to distribute the types, he calls it balanced job complexes, you know, that make sure everybody does at least a little of each broad category of work. So
does this correspond with what we were saying about stakeholders earlier?
Yes, basically
Kind of
distribute
division of
stakeholders.
labor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is a really interesting idea. Maybe we should take this further. I mean, there's different ways we could do that. I mean, we could split the group up into where you're coming from, what your actual, in terms of how many have we got here? 12 people. Split us up into whatever, you know. I'm sure there's some people that work with the NHS, there's some people that have been as patients, and into those different, divide ourselves in that way. Another way we could do it is use different colors for the different stakeholders in our visual representation. There are a few things we need to sort out for the next meeting. I was wondering if we wanted to have a bit of discussion on some of those, because there's three kind of main questions, isn't it? One is the facilitation. Two is who is going to make up the actual teams carrying out the making the graph, making the picture, making the artwork, and the other one is what kind of scale are we talking about? Are we talking about work making a representation of a hospital or of a city, and how that is linked up? Because a lot of those questions at the beginning we were talking about, for example, in Royava, it opens up questions of, okay, where are the other, where's the school, where's the council meeting place, where are those in relation to the hospital, and how does it all fit together? And so in this visual assembly, the question I'd like to ask everyone is, what kind of scale do you want to think, do we want to be creating on? Do we want to think of the city and how different things fit together, and how those particularly those health institutions or health facilities are going to fit together? Or are we talking about a centralized site, house of healing? I don't know if anyone's got any comments on that.
I would suggest concentrate on house of healing and territories around, because our first experience with the city of care was exactly that it's require a lot of work, preparational work and conversations to really go to have something that will be valuable for not just a fun experience, not one more art projects, but something that could stay there and people can reuse it even as an idea and a new experience. So I would suggest we concentrate on the specifically healthcare. Yeah.
In that larger context, imagining ourselves in a society where everything has been democratized, but we don't have to go over the details of how.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to return to the thing about the stakeholders and the different stakeholders, I mean, what do people think about that? Do we think that it's better that in our visual assembly we actually do split up? I mean, we can have break-off rooms in a Zoom meeting, so we can have different meetings within the Zoom meeting. We can go to those groups and then return for a plenary, maybe have a plenary at the beginning, go off, work in our stakeholder groups, then come back. But that in the actual visual assembly, that would mean the artists on the ground are being directed by different groups, or are they being directed by the plenary?
I think it
so. Yeah, the question.
By the plenary to different groups, right? And that's how you normally do it. Like, in fact, we're probably going to do that today. We're going to form a series of working groups and empower them to do certain things, right?
But if we're in different stakeholder groups, or we've divided labor in that way, and even our intellectual labor about those different groups, then does that mean, is that going to mean that we're being too specialized? Are we, if we're just thinking as patients, are we missing out things? We're missing an opportunity for us all to meet altogether without and to destroy that division of labor.
Yeah, that's the key thing. That's what I was worried about with the stakeholder. Like, you know, in theory, we'd want everyone to have at least a little bit of everything. Yeah.
Brilliant. Jim, you had your hand up there? You will need to unmute.
Jim.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
No. I was just moving about.
Oh, okay.
No, my battery is about to die.
Okay.
So no, I was just fiddling about. So no, I'm
Never
just I'm just listening intently.
Sorry to put you on the spot. Okay, so I guess that's the tricky question. How do we do? I mean, the fact that everybody should have experience at everything doesn't mean that certain people wouldn't prefer to concentrate on certain areas for their brainstorming activities. You know, means that they'll do so more effectively.
But yeah, but we are not going to do it today. Yeah, so it's like I think we're supposed to.
Well, it sounds like there's two things we're discussing. Today, we might well form working groups that will meet, you know, before the next larger meeting, you know, to do the stencils or to figure out the details of facilitation. And so
yeah, the stencils is the other concrete outcome that we're looking for is the creation of these stencils and agreement on the stencils. So I think that might work really well if we were to divide into stakeholder things and look for specific stencils for that would make sense to those stakeholders. Another thing is we could have different colors for those different stakeholders. So there's a visual thing where you can see roots kind of easily if we're going to be thinking in terms of different groups of workers or consumers, etc. Yeah, Fabian.
Yeah, the neoliberals, they've already brought out a game of building a hospital.
Have they?
Yes, and the object of the game is, weirdly enough, to make money.
Why am I not shocked?
But what's quite interesting is how they use graphics for the game. And they're creating a dynamic model, which actually each turn you're growing it, you're getting more doctors in. You've got like these very important people, these are the cleaners. So you get the cleaners. And also there's a lot of issue made about car parking.
Yeah, that seems to keep.
So one of the I mean, certainly in the UK, something people are crazy about, because for a while the hospitals were making a lot of money out of very high fees to park a car there, because, well, the bus service isn't too good. So what I picked up from the game was it was a way of creating a dynamic model. So you start off with the images, but then you actually have the idea that you have patients coming through and everything like that. Their model and their whole dynamic is about dollars, but it doesn't have to be done that way. So I'm thinking if we start off with some kind of snapshot depiction, but then the next phase we're thinking of from the beginning is to move to a dynamic model of how it could all be done, so that as different needs change, the model is adapting to it. And again, the other thing is linking it into other issues like public transport, right? That you can actually say, actually, part of having a sensible hospital is it might be having small hospitals so that people don't have to travel too far, or making sure that there is suitable public transport so you don't need acres and acres of car park and all the problems involved in that. So I think if we start off with, even if we start off with snapshots, we're then looking towards creating a dynamic model a bit further down the line. So I think the snapshots and the stencils are good. And then if you start, like I like that picture, the layout picture you showed us, but you then can start moving, you know, having things representing objects which move around in them, representing the flows, and then that could be open up this kind of dynamic approach to it once having the stencils in place.
Great. Yeah, like love the idea of the game.
Yeah, we're looking at images from the game.
Yeah, we found it online. Thank you so much. That's great. Maybe we can also do like after we do this.
There it is.
Visual assembly, we can do our own game and you know, just put it online for people to print out.
Yes.
Like the different. Yeah, this is a great media.
No, it's brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Treat patients for profit to build the city's most lucrative clinic. Amazing.
Yeah, we can also make some kind of job game, like, you know, for the vampires to to suck up their blood and resell it.
I think that probably already exists. Yeah.
Yeah, cut off their
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm just going to have to leave because my battery is about to die. So if you can keep me in the loop and that, and I'll have a look at what we've been discussing.
It can be in this group for the actual NHS workers, and if I can be there too, just to listen. Yeah, working group.
So
that will be my total kind of.
Yes, we wish to draw on your knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to go. My phone's going to die. Bye-bye.
Bye. Adios. Bye.
Okay, so maybe we should wrap up now. Yeah?
Well, we have, what are the tasks before us that we need to do, and then then we're going to maybe we should figure out the working groups that will be working before the next plenary.
We have making stencils. We have deciding on stencils. Which I guess we want to get from each of the working groups. It would be nice for every working group to come up with a few stencils that they think would be useful, so that we can collate them. We also need to decide on who's going to be on the street on the day. So we've got a few different roles. So we need, since we're talking about 2 teams, so we're going to need 2 of these. So for each team, we need an artist, a videographer, a scribe, and 1 or 2 assistants. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people per team. And then obviously on Zoom, we need a kind of facilitator or chair.
Probably 2, just to be on the safe side. Anything critical you want to.
But maybe I suggest we will make this decision not right now who will be who, because if we start to work in these working groups, that will take us time, maybe a couple of weeks, and we will communicate with each other. And then during that time, we will figure out, people will figure out who's really want to do what. So that's my suggestion. And now if we will have a stencils, like ideas for stencils, I'm ready to design them, like to put them in the same design and to cut them out physically for London myself. So for the at least one group, and we can do it in Portobello Road as we did already. So 1 team you have.
Oh, so we'll be the backup Portobello
we
team.
can be a backup.
And then we can have the
Portobello.
Ninja Strike Force, which will go into.
And I understand you agree to be like in the front runner in front of the hospital.
Oh, you're the ninja.
Yeah, sure. I'll be the artist unless anyone else wants to. But yeah, I'll be happy to be on that team at St. Mary's.
Yeah, we should invite. We should also figure out how to invite a lot of press, because probably you would not be able to do the public artwork.
Yeah,
but
be
you
like
will.
A Michael Moore thing.
Yeah, but so you need people who will film how they will chase you out and explain.
Yeah, we'll have a videographer. I think Alia said that she might join us in that team.
Oh yeah, she is.
Okay.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Oh, hello, Alia.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, no, I just missed that, Austin. What were you saying?
So we were talking about, Nika and David are going to do the Portobello team. They're going to be on the ground there.
Yeah.
And then I said that you said you might be in Wim with me at St. Mary's.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
So yeah, work, but otherwise, I'll definitely fix that before.
Okay. Cool. So then, I said maybe working groups. We should discuss.
Yeah,
it
we
via
should probably.
emails,
Oh, you think you should? We don't need to set the working groups now. You think you can do that by email?
I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'm used to doing this in person, and you send around a sign-up sheet. But I guess the equivalent of a sign-up sheet would be a virtual thing.
I mean, does anyone have any ideas or suggestions for what these working groups would be?
Yeah, maybe that's what we should do. Is we should just figure out what they are, and then like go through people for each after the meeting. So, but should we just throw stuff out?
I think Lemmy already proposed that. Wait, it was a proposal.
I haven't been
so it's.
One way to counteract some of the deficiencies in my proposal, as David was mentioning, is maybe one person could, like, across time be a part of like multiple working groups. So like once we could have like 2 iterations of this, like we could form working groups twice, basically, with people like swapping working groups. So some of the aspects like David mentioned of people not having like a specific role in order to like not encourage hierarchy, that is like modeled in as well, I guess.
Okay.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, but I think the working group is so it's a patient, nurses. In this case, it's like health workers, doctors. And
okay, so I should have been writing this. Okay. Well, other people, here we are. Patients, nurses, doctors, healthy people, and many more, obviously.
Architecture.
Architects.
Yeah. Maybe since we're like sorry for butting in here. Sorry for this. I'm pretty not used to online meetings, but yeah, maybe since we're just like not many people, we could just have like an in group and an out group, and then within the in group we could decide whoever, like all of the different roles and everything and the perspectives. So the people who like the in-group will be maybe the people who work in the hospital, and the out-group would be maybe the patients plus the wider community, and that would be like just two of them, and then each working group gives the time and effort to, you know, like think of all of the aspects, I guess. Yeah, sorry for taking too much time.
Oh yes,
sounds good.
I was just thinking in that context, there is the in and out, I thought made sense, i.e. the people who are spending their time keeping the whole thing going, and then you've got the patients coming in as one particular group, people receiving care. But then there is the how the hospital would exist within the broader supply of different services, transport, municipal. So we start having those connections being brought in as well, rather not, you know, the cleaning. How is the cleaning done? Right? You know, or how do we make sure we've got a proper public transport?
Right.
Coming to the facility. Those sorts of questions, right?
Yeah.
The easy questions, you know, those ones.
Yeah. So that would be like the logistics.
I think it's an outside, like I think it's a professional in group, but who is outside. So it's like a second group of outsiders, not the patients, but the.
So we got basically the care team, the logistic out team, and the potential patient team.
Yeah.
That makes sense to people?
Yeah.
And then this architects should be the us, like the people should.
We're the architects.
Like no, I mean like not me and David, but everybody together. Yeah. So the groups should come together and then decide what kind of architecture should this place have, and depending on what we decide, that will be our map that we will create. You know. So I propose one today as a like. The central hospital, and then it's surrounded by this kind of preventive care, but maybe it should be like the hospital should not be one place in the middle. It should be distributed, rooms throughout the space, connected by public transportation or like, in a working distance. So this map should be result of architectural ideas, should be result of discussions of representative of the working groups together, yeah? Something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Makes sense to me. I don't know what other people think.
And I can also actually talk to some kind of cool architects that I know. Maybe we can involve them and they can help us to develop some kind of,
So I think part of the idea of the working groups is that anybody who's involved in them can recruit people who they think have some special, insight or experience.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I've got Lemmy had his hand up. Lemmy, would you like to speak? You need to unmute yourself there, Lemmy.
Yeah, I was just doing the stars gesture, I guess. The twinkling gesture, like the, yeah, that one. So like one thing is we need to think of like swapping these like groups together like across time as well, maybe. So if you give like 6 hours in one working group, then all of your group maybe then moves on to be like something else. So yeah, like if you're like patients for a while, then maybe we could get together and discuss and then have another round where you're something else, and then like think of that again and then maybe discuss once more. So like a 2-step process in order to, as I said earlier, in order to like prevent those hierarchies, I guess. But I think that's more of a functional everyday day-to-day thing. It won't turn up in the, even if you do one iteration, I don't think those hierarchies will like manifest themselves, I guess. So what do you think, everyone? Like of the idea of two iterations with each group being like different things, like different roles each time.
Yeah, over time you mean? So it changes after like a week or 2 weeks. We reassign groups or we switch groups. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like however long we decide to keep it.
I'm not against it, but I'm thinking more if we said, okay, let's do a first iteration of this, give it a certain, shape, something that, things we want to achieve, and how much time we expect it to take, and then come back and look at it all, and then with a view to including that people moving around, encouraging people to move around at that stage, rather than to get too much into detail at that moment, because we might want to change how it all works at that stage as well. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and one more point I think we should collectively decide upon is the time and effort. All of us in like the general guidance of the time and effort should be collectively decided, I guess. That's just what I feel.
When you say collectively decide general guidance of the time, what do you mean more specifically?
So in the working groups, how many hours basically do we expect to spend in like coming up with stuff and just researching stuff and stuff? So yeah.
So you mean like each working group probably can meet for like, for another hour? And, and then we can just, what do you think? Try also, like, should we just do another assembly, like, but smaller group for the patient and for the doctors? I mean, for the practitioners.
The ins and the outs. I mean, yeah, I guess if we aim to have another meeting in a week's time or something, for each group, I'm interested in who here would be in the in group, who would be in the out group. Where would you place yourself? In the participant window, there is I think there is there a way to put your hand up or something? But there's a reaction thing where you could.
Reactions.
Is it reactions? I think I'm a host, so I don't get it. So what is it? Thumbs up for the in group, thumbs wave for the out group. Is that what it is? It's thumbs up and wave.
Yeah.
So wave if you're in the out group,
Clap.
and thumbs up if you're in the in group. I think you work in the NHS, Alia, so you'd probably be the in-group.
I'm confused now, so yeah, maybe I'll just go with in-group.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, this is the thing, you know. I mean, you can take different. You can take a different. It's not. Yeah, it's an interesting
Oh, so
question. What
it's like a snap poll. The reaction, it disappears after a while. So
oh, does it?
it's
Oh,
more.
okay. So you
Yeah,
got to keep doing it. That's why I was wondering why it's all
yeah.
fading. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like I would like to be in the in-group. I don't work for the NHS, but I'm a long-term patient of the NHS. But I would like to. I would think one as an organizer, I'd like to be in that group just to help that group focus and answer any questions about the visual assembly and about what we're doing in that way.
I also would like to be in both groups. So.
I think people should be able to choose which group they want to be in based on their interests, not based on a particular relationship with the NHS. I mean, I'm in the United States. I have no relationship with the NHS, but if you want to be in that group, I think that's what's important. And I also agree, I think it was with Fabian, that we should see how it goes. I mean, as somebody who personally is incredibly pressed for time, it's the idea of swapping groups and doing it all, I think it should be an open question. So.
Well, should we set a date for a meeting of the working group so we all know we're all going to be meeting at that time? We could have them simultaneous. We could have them one after the other, or a different time. Simultaneous might be interesting.
So yeah, but that would mean that people can't be in both.
So yeah,
what I would suggest is if we have them simultaneously, but we start off with like, I don't know, quarter of an hour, so we can invite people into oh yeah, this is what we're doing. We're going to split into two groups at 3:30, so you need to be sitting out thinking which one you want to go into. So if we're inviting people in, they can get their head around what's going on. Then we have the two separate groups, and we break into the in and the out group for an agreed amount of time. And then when that time is over, each group, perhaps using some means like Google Docs or whatever to keep track of their discussion. Then after that agreed amount of time, we come back, not to have a full explanation, but just to kind of say, yeah, well, we had good time, or we argued all the time, or whatever, but just so that we keep the overall sense of unity together. And then people can start looking at what the other group had written and see what other connections there are between the two.
Sounds good to me. Yeah. We have a plenary at the end. Do it at the same time. Maybe should we say in a week's time? Yeah. This time next week.
Okay.
We got consensus.
Good. Okay, so cool. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Sorry, these annoying people across the street who like to entertain everybody by playing from their window. I mean, it was great the first like 8 times I started up. So that's why
they always sing in the same song.
It's the same song. I mean, they'll lip sync 2 or 3 and then play their one song, which is a nice song, but after a while. So
do they play it over and over and over again?
No, they just do it like every day. Around either at 2 or at 4.
On the weekends.
So they were doing it in the week for a while during lockdown.
What song is it? I'm really curious now.
What band?
What song is it? Yeah. Is it band?
Oh, they stopped. They're playing another one now. It's like "I Want to Live Like a Rolling Stone" seems to be the chorus. I think they're on material. They cover all the other ones are covers, but that's the one that's like their song.
Yeah, practicing.
Music in the pandemic.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the thing of living on Portobello Road. Somebody's got to be like serenading everybody any given time.
Well, so we've got this in England. Are people getting out, doing their shopping?
Yeah. At this point, like everybody's just like 1 in 20 people have a mask.
Really, only 1 in 20.
Well, in
Wow.
this neighborhood, I mean, then they legally have to like get on public transportation or
And to get in a supermarket.
depends on
people are just going about as they want. Yeah, there's not much.
Go to Whole Foods,
not here in Cambridge.
Tesco.
The government's reopened the high street, so it's probably going to be carnage out there today.
This morning.
Yeah, but people are so impressed about what's happening in the USA that they're opening the pubs, and today, Independence Day they call it, so that they can actually achieve same sort of levels of a second spike as the USA, because they were really jealous that
US is totally number 1 in terms of death.
America first. America first.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to see y'all.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for coming. This was great. I hope it will work. Maybe we can just actually do some real, kind of important public monument that will be collectively designed, and produced.
Yeah, so hopefully see you all next week, and then in the meantime, also think about those stencils, think about those signs and those.
That's the next step. We need to come up with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think in what I'm thinking is for next week is that we have an actual time in the meeting where maybe 5 or 10 minutes we go off and we just find a Google link of an image that we think would be good for a basis for a stencil, and we all just bring it back in the meeting.
Or maybe people do that as their homework.
Right, exactly. Each of us comes back like you send people off and say each one of you can bring one person to the next meeting. In this case, each one of us should bring at least one.
As a teacher, I put very little stock in homework. I want to see them work in front of me. I think it often works better if you do the work there in the class. So homework is great though. If people can think about that before next week and during this week, and bring some ideas together, or email us at we@v-a.city, I think it is. But do you all know the website? We've got a website up now as well, and we've got our email address.
It's not really totally ready. It's still under construction. But we are working on that.
It's making progress.
It's making progress.
Yeah, it's getting there. It's good. So if anyone wants to actually add to it, anyone has any thoughts about it, and you can add to it. So we haven't got much on it at the moment. We've just got that text that we did for today's meeting.
Very nice collage there.
A little bit about who was there last time. And I put a few things, kind of stencil examples there.
I should tweet this.
And then that was our link. That was for today. So we'll probably do a little bit of a write-up about today, which will come onto this website. The address is there, va.city. And if you want to contact us as well, our email is down the bottom here, I think. we@v-a.city. So yeah, if you are wondering what's happening, then check the assemblies link on there, and we will have a report. Hopefully in the next couple of days we'll have a report on today's meeting, and some details about the next meeting.
Okay.
All right, brilliant. Cheers. Thanks again, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, David and
Nika. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
So are we supposed to self-organize now into different?
Yeah, we're gonna. I guess we'll send out CC things. Do we have a CC list of everybody on it? I mean.
Oh no, we don't.
Actually, we don't. Oh my God. Well, there we go. That's what we didn't think of.
Maybe people are leaving an email here.
Yeah, if you could leave email in the chat, that would be good.
Okay.
Leave a contact in the chat, and then we'll have everyone's contact there, and we'll try and add. Just to make sure that we got it together. I mean, because some people I know I'm contacting on Facebook, some people I'm contacting email, some people on my phone, etc.
Yeah, and then I've got some people I'd like to throw in to NECC list. Remember, Sophie said that she was going to get involved. So we'll just all throw in some people we think either might be or should be in visit.
Okay. Cool. So, and I understand that you will put the recording on the same place where you put last time, yeah?
Yes, yes. If
Or
I
maybe
get the
on the
recording, I
webpage.
think you guys might get the recording because you started it.
Oh, really?
Okay.
It's probably because you started it, so it's probably going to be on your local computer.
Okay, so I'll have to do
okay.
that trick again, which I don't want.
It's quite a long. It takes a bit of time, doesn't it? It's a big bit of video.
Yeah, but you just go away, do something else, come back for lunch, and it's done.
Yeah, nice one. Yeah.
So
And the chat as well. Don't forget the chat. Maybe take the email addresses off so the chat. But it's only shared between us, and it's not like it's going public. But let's remember to save the chat as well, or share it in the shared drive.
I want to save.
Oh well, you don't do that PDF. You do that on a Word.
Cool. So, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Yes, I do. No, I don't. I don't want to say goodbye. But all right. Well, this was a great meeting, and enjoyed working with all you guys. Let us continue. I think this project, it sounds like it's actually going to be really awesome. I'm quite enthused. How do you feel, Nika?
Great. Yeah, let's see what we can actually do if I'm not only talking. It will be fun.
Yeah, I was about to type this in the chat, but I forgot that. Like, I wish I were like a professional, like expert video game developer. You know, I could just share my screen, and then you guys could tell me I could whip up models and stuff. Okay, now you need like a 10-acre parking lot. Oh no, the fees are like are very low. So yeah, we could do all sorts of cool stuff in a video game, I guess. Yeah.
Doing something digitally is an idea as well, and maybe it's something we could try. We could try some sort of collaborative drawing platform or space. It's an interesting idea. Yeah, I think doing an assembly visually. Just totally digitally. But yeah, it might be something worth trying before we do one using paint.
Yeah, because our artifacts in the digital world like are as real as artifacts in the physical world, and then maybe we could just go out and then do it in the real world, like in the physical world once more, I guess. Sorry. So yeah.
Yeah, there's various mappings, isn't there, of digital and the physical. You know, this project, when I first come across it, it reminded me of like in the late 90s, there was something called war chalking. Remember war chalking, folks? People used to walk around chalking there's like those hobo signs that you get on buildings with chalk. And people would do it with wireless networks. So the wireless networks that were open, and they'd write what kind
of... this is what Saul used to go on about.
Yeah.
Can I repeat that? What was that?
They would use kind of signs. I think it came from like hobo markings in America, where hobos would go across the country and just wander. And they would leave markings on certain places and shops to say that this was a good place to beg, or this is a good spot this is a good place to get on the train or to bunk the train, etc. And so they made these chalk markings on buildings where you'd get a wireless network and say, okay, this is an unsecured wireless network here. It should be on the pavement. So you could wander around the city, and you'd get it in London where you'd wander around the city with your laptop, because it was that time that there weren't smartphones at that time. This is about late 90s.
No, I remember this. I remember once I was in Amsterdam and I was supposed to meet some guy who would show up, and I was wandering around the city with my laptop like this until I could find something I could log on to send him an email. Where the hell are you? Yeah, but eventually if you walk long enough, you'd find one. So this would be to save you a lot of time.
Yeah, this they'd use the chalk to do that. But I mean, the interesting thing is where this map that we're making kind of overspills into the territory. That's why I like this thing of it being outside St. Mary's. You know, there's a lot of potential with digital stuff, and I'm not knocking that at all. I think it's really good. But I like the thing of being outside St. Mary's, and allowing this map to overspill into its territory and take over.
Yeah, that hybrid. The two kind of dimensions start interacting, like.
Yeah, and that's this thing that was, it come up in the discussion of the hospital as a visual assembly. And that's the you know we and it's kind of that in that you know, in bringing health workers in because health workers being in part of this is a central part of it. Basically we're kind of creating a little hospital, right? We're creating a space in which health professionals are working together. So the visual assembly is a hospital in that way. As much as we're talking about the hospital becoming a visual assembly, we're talking this visual assembly becoming a hospital in a way.
I mean, also, I'm thinking maybe I might wander around and see if I can take some photographs of a bricks and mortar hospital. Just
Oh yeah, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Please share.
Yeah, but I mean, then the start to, because I'm thinking, okay, where am I going to go with this? And then I'm thinking, well, I really want to go with what's happening around me. So if I start using the photographs of what's actually there, it starts to key in. And if I do it as I'm walking around, I start to see the different localities, how kind of health centre at the bottom of my road, I don't know what they do there. I must do something.
Yeah, I noticed that when I walk around here, I just really don't understand. There's all this stuff I had no idea was there.
Yeah.
That health centre, we've got to have a look at that place on that in Ilford, Faye, that old Iron Age fort in Ilford.
Oh yeah.
Which is now, it's now got a health centre on it. I reckon there's some kind of ley line being tapped there, some ancient site, and they've got this like residential care place there. But space is so important to this, you know what I mean? It's all about space. From right at the beginning, when we was talking about hospitals and how you feel in hospitals, when I was a teenager, quite a few of my friends ended up in psychiatric hospitals, and the psychiatric hospital was really close to where I was living. So we and there was one friend, a couple of friends of ours, that once they were released from it, they would then go and camp in the grounds of the psychiatric hospital because it was such a safe place for them. And we used to often hang out there, you know, and we'd find that it was a space that we could actually go and hang out with our friends because half of them were in there, and actually just be able to feel kind of safe. Yeah, so I think it's this, you know, and with COVID as well, it's all about access to space, and that space in your home being a space of healing. You stay in your home, but people have been fucking dying because they ain't going out of their homes, and being turned away from hospitals. So it's, yeah, I think that space is really important, to be out in the space and
in the mental hospitals 100 years ago, they used to have their own breweries.
Really?
Yeah, their own farms. And, they took so much activity within their community. I mean, it was just like, you read about this and it's just like, you know, a bit like monasteries. Monasteries used to have their own breweries as well. So, you know, and I think the monastery and the hospital, certainly in Europe, have a shared history.
And the school, and there's these spaces that do, isn't there?
Yeah, and you know, and the way that it used to be, the nurses used to dress like nuns, because originally they were nuns.
They were, yeah.
So you have this sort of transition, and then you have the leper hospitals, which were basically like an asylum to separate lepers from the rest of society. And
were the Hospitallers a monastic order? Because like the Knights Templar were a monastic order, and the Hospitallers.
Yes, indeed they were. Yes, they were.
It's very interesting that museums also kind of coming out of the churches and as a replacement of churches, and it looks like hospitals are very much the same. You know,
sort of division of the what had formerly been the sort of sacred domain.
Yeah. And in this case, we just finished now text with David about that is ending up with this Russian cosmism and their attempt to achieve immortality. And it's interesting that Javin was talking about this 1%. Now she was talking about 1% who is trying now to suck all resources and achieve immortality for themselves.
Right. So this is the logical end of their attempt to create is the destruction of everything else.
Yeah.
So the end of the age of divinity, isn't it? Yeah, truly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can also talk about Russian avant-garde, who was actually wanted to stop making art in attempt to make every human being as the art piece, or recognize every human being an art piece. And in this case, hospital is the ideal museum where like every human being who is there is like being taken care of
and treated as a value in themselves, rather like a work of art would be.
Yeah. So you have a relationship, unique value, and have a relationship among people instead of relationship between people and objects that you preserve. Yeah, and so this Nikolai Fedorov, the original Russian cosmism, he was saying that museum is the earth of humanity that's traveling through the universe. So that's where we have to put all our attempts and resources to preserve and to heal and to kind of make you live forever, things like that. So
interesting.
Yeah, like I don't know a lot about NHS. If we have time, maybe we can ask actual NHS workers if it's possible to change anything. All of the activists who's trying to
change anything
in NHS. So now it's like only my understanding, but I'm outside. So NHS trying to get more money to pay more to the people who is working in NHS. But because NHS is like any other Western hospital is designed as a factory, the money will go from up down. Basically, the managers will be more
right. The managers decide who gets the money, so they tend to decide who goes to the managers.
Yeah. So that's how it goes. I'm just checking what is the status of the current NHS situation.
Well, no, the money comes from local commissioning groups. There's clinical commissioning groups. They decide. And the government sort of decides what they decide. So it's very bureaucratic. It's not really about the managers at all. So it's very political. It's all very political. And really, at the moment, we need to be putting more pressure on the government to make the right decisions. So it's incredibly political at the moment as well, like more than usual because of everything that's going on with COVID, and they've kind of lifted lockdown essentially now, or effectively now. It's going to be a complete shit show. We're going to have, I mean, we've mentioned it already. It's going to, the infection rate, the death rate, it's all going to rise. You know, it's inevitable now. And you know, they've opened pubs. It's just going to be carnage, really, and people aren't going to be. And that's what the government want. And they're going to blame the public, and it's just going to be more shenanigans of the same kind, really.
So they think they're covering up.
I mean, they are. Boris is having to concede to what the consensus is. So it is actually possible to make a bit of a change at the moment because everyone's really riled up. They've been clapping and all of that stuff every week. So people are really a bit more engaged at the moment. So we can actually. I don't know if that's what you were saying, but yeah, we can actually. Like, you know, there has been a significant U-turn in one of the immigration policies.
Yeah.
That's to do with
related to the NHS.
Yeah. So initially, unless you were working on the front line as a migrant, and even if you were working on the front line, you still had to pay like £600 to access healthcare. Now that's on top of taxes and everything. So they're paying loads of money, and they're risking their lives. So because there was so much fuss made for years, by the way, this fuss has been being made for a long time, but because of the pandemic, they're having to actually take heed to what people are saying because of all this clapping, and you know, the government are joining in because they have to. They have to. They can't. It's far too revealing if they, you know. And obviously, a lot of people are aware that they're really, really racist and awful and hate the working class. But a lot of people do read these trash newspapers and believe that stuff because they don't. They just don't. I don't know. You know, they do. Whatever the reasons are, the propaganda is reaching them and affecting them. So at the moment, things are different for a collection of reasons, but things are different. We are able to kind of, so with that immigration policy, for example, it's been changed now. I don't think it's actually I don't think it's actually being properly implemented. I think they're still lying to us because they just keep lying to us, but they've had to change the policy. So if you do work in the NHS, you don't have to pay the surcharge. However, other migrants do have to, so it's still really violent and it's still difficult for you to access healthcare. But if you've risked your life to work for barely anything, you don't have to pay this £400 or £600, I can't remember now, but you don't have to pay.
Is it a month you pay or what? What is that?
Access healthcare. So if you actually need support, you have to pay a lot of money. If you actually want to, like, if you get COVID-19, for example, or it's really quite, yeah.
Because I'm a migrant, should I'm supposed to pay every month or what? Is it like one?
No, I don't think it's if you're paying every month. I think it's if you want to access certain, certain facilities in the NHS, you will have to pay a lot of money. Is that not the case? Do you not have to pay?
Okay.
I mean, Nika has broke her foot at one point and just went in, and they just wanted an envelope with her address on it and didn't ask any questions about her migration.
Oh, that's interesting. So maybe it just depends on your status.
I've been a migrant for years, and they never asked me. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure how it works then in that case, but I suppose it is more racist than I realised in that case, and maybe it is if you are.
Yes, I think it's racist.
If
you're white,
yeah. If you're white, you probably are exempt in ways that I didn't even realise. So that's really interesting, actually.
But I think it's because the implementation varies, and some people just don't bother to implement it and haven't, and some people the pressure's been put more by management to implement it. So I think there's a lot of local variation.
So maybe in London they don't do it.
One day they don't. You might go to the same place the next day, and there's a different staff member who says,
Right, but I've been here for 10 years, and I've never once had anybody even ask me. I mean, obviously, I'm not British. I have a foreign accent.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm just that picking up from bits that I've heard that when they tried to bring it in, lots of people said, "No, we're not going to waste our time doing that."
Yeah, the migration is a problem also, like in Graz in Austria. People were saying immediately that most of the care workers is coming from the
Poland and
East
Slovakia,
Europe, and they're like really badly paid and very badly kind of very.
They really what? They're really
badly paid and treated.
Yeah, and they live in a crowded conditions.
Thing. There's all these charges they put on them for the same work that they do, basically. Yeah. So there's a similar.
Yeah, very similar, and it's migration is looks like one of the key problems of the healthcare system. So it's exactly this type of logistic that is between outside and inside of hospital. It's actually not even about government. It's not politics of government towards the healthcare. It's a foreign policy in between governments that is affecting the way how the healthcare system organized. That is very interesting. But the other question I want to ask is, so we do have a democratic schools that run democratically. We do have.
There are examples
of that. Not all of them, a very small amount, but they exist. But is it exist anywhere democratically run hospitals? If it's even any examples of that in the world? If it's, I don't know.
There is some therapeutic communities have set out to do that in a psychiatric context.
Psychiatric is definitely
Yeah, I was just asking, I'm sorry about my English. I was just asking if there is an example, if there is an example of democratically run hospital anywhere in the world. And so the answer was yes, some psychiatric facilities, probably after French 1968.
There's a whole series.
No, it goes back to the 18th century. There was the Retreat, which was founded by Henry Toot, way back. It actually it got shut down about 2 years ago, but it had been going for over 100 years.
Wow.
And that was when there started to be a change in the idea of recovery from mental health problems, rather than just putting people on show like they were like something for the public to pay money to go and look at. So that kind of happened there. And then in the previous session, I put up some stuff beforehand about the hospital set up in Sierra Leone
Very
in the
interesting.
early 19th century. And Henry Tute, who set up this one in the late 18th century, was also involved with that. So they had the idea of asylum gets moved over to people who'd been enslaved needing particular care. There were abuses in that as well. So that kind of was going around in that period around the French Revolution and just in that period just after that, with the Quakers playing a particularly strong role in that. To what extent democracy was achieved or was an aspiration, again.
And do you think it's possible anywhere right now in NHS to find a small place inside of the system that will be agreed to implement at least elements of that? That's what they did in the school system. They just found some experimental small schools where they said, okay, let's try and see what happens. In fact, slowly they build up this movement. If it's possible to do any of this in NHS.
I'm just looking to see if I can find something. There was a therapeutic community network, and I'll put it in the
I tend to think it would be more possible in private health institutions, like the educational thing must be private or private or free schools that are being able to do that, not state schools.
Actually, you're right. In England, it's only private. But for example, in Germany and in Israel, it's a public institution who is schools who is free and democratic.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, but in France and in UK, it's only, in the US also, it's only private, and that's a big difference. They're private and not public, because of course only people with money can go to the summer hill. It costs like £20,000 a year. Yeah.
There was the SPK in Germany, which is, like you're saying, post 68. It was about 60s, but that was where the patients and the doctors took over the asylum, and they worked together.
SPK?
Yeah.
Yes, it's Socialist Patients Collective. I think they were connected to the Red Army faction as well. So some of them went on to join the Red Army faction, where the SPK sort of folded when the hospital was retaken. Basically, they occupied the hospital.
Yeah.
And some of the doctors joined the patients.
And then there was a cover band in Australia who used to have the same name.
The Red Army faction or the SPK?
The SPK. They were like a musical interpretation of it.
I didn't know this. I'll have to look that up.
SPK is really good. Yeah, turn illness into a weapon was their slogan. Turn illness into a weapon.
Oh wow,
that's beautiful. Yeah.
Do a weapon.
So basically, like they because it's a silent. I understand that Alia, like, yeah. So you don't think it's actually even any chance to experiment in
not at the moment. I think at the moment, you know, we're not even able to go into our places of work as therapists because they're completely taken over by COVID related, you know, trying to manage kind of outpatient units. And at the moment, all sort of normal or all kind of standard specialist care and stuff, not standard, sorry, specialist care is completely stopped. We're not doing lots and lots of things that we would usually be doing. So it's just a bit of a weird situation at the moment. But I can have a little word around and see. I don't think that there's much scope for at the moment, just because of, and also at the NHS, like people like me are saying, don't go out, don't do things, you know, be safe, stay at home. So it's a bit of a conflict of interest there. But I can have a look and see if there are spaces that are available, because on the, you know, kind of on the flip side, there might be somewhere that is available. I'm just thinking as I'm talking about it, I don't know.
No, I think that is that, you know, I've heard of a few instances where I don't know what James's experience is, because you're going in, Jim, are you, to the hospital And whether the failure of management or the space created by COVID, or the kind of emergency that's been created, has that allowed for more democratic decision making on the wards? Has it allowed, because I think to some extent there has been a little bit of ability for workers to exercise direct democracy in the hospital, because of some of the failures of the NHS to manage what's going on at the moment.
That happened in America as well.
And it's happened in Pakistan as well, from what we were talking to Alia Haider. But James, what's your experience in the hospitals on the day to day? Do you think there is more democracy, less democracy?
So my experience of going in on a day-to-day basis is that we get, I can't remember the name for it, but we go in each morning and we get an email which tells us the situation in the hospital, kind of how we need to behave, interact, what are the policies that we need to adhere to, and things like that. So in that sense, a lot of that, yeah. So we get an email which is from the chief executive each day, which tells us what to do, and that. And I think within this situation, because it's been a new situation that we've not really gone through, I think really things. So we have a consultant nurse who runs our immediate department, and so we get these hand downs of what we've got to do, and then something will come along one week and she will walk in and tell us to, you know, and also when you're given directions. So I remember doing this when I was at Dartington, of like writing instructions for kind of doing performance kind of thing, and you would give them to people and you would think that you were being really clear about what you were doing, and then you would give it to somebody, and a lot of my things were about knitting and things like that, and I'd kind of say knit 10 rows of 10 stitches and do the, and I remember doing one on a trip to Glasgow, and I ended up with this huge long misshaped piece of fantastical knitting. And that's kind of what's happening in the hospital as well. I mean, you just tell people how to use PPE, and then all of a sudden, you know, I mean, how many, we see it just in general public as well, people walking around with like masks and they're kind of putting masks on, and how many times have we been told that if you touch the front of your mask or you put it underneath your chin, and this about reinfection, and you're seeing everybody doing it, and so yeah, so you see people interpreting ideas differently. But I guess, yeah, in the hospital, I guess it just feels more controlled, but because it's a new, more controlled, but I guess because the directions and the way to behave are, you know, you just do things intrinsically sometimes. It's really hard sometimes working within PP guidelines, and you have to constantly recheck yourself to kind of make sure that you're working in them, because how long have we never had to hug somebody for, or a lot of what I do with working with patients is helping people with a procedure which essentially you're putting a cannula but into to close to the heart, and so you explain this whole procedure and people freak out. So a lot of my job when we're not in COVID is holding people's hands and kind of giving them physical touch to calm them down and do all of this. And in PPE you're removed from all that, so it's like how do you give that closeness and that care to people when they're freaking out? You know, and you come at them essentially looking like that scene from ET where they're all in PPE.
I mean, that's why we can't do therapy, because the kids will just freak out if they see us in the, you know, it's just better if they don't. It will just freak them out. We can't do the assessments and stuff.
Yeah.
I think probably in hospital care, they are having to be more stringent, and that's why they're having these problems where they're actually having sort of black and brown people being pushed to the front line,
Mm.
and they're having to do what they're told. In our service, we are able to think more creatively because it's a different service. It's therapy. It's like that. You know, it's a bit different, and we are having like, it's weird times. More people are more kids are killing themselves at the moment. So we're having, and we're not getting any support other than our team. So we're having more meetings to talk about, all right, well, how do we deal with this? So I think it does vary on the service, and in services where you have to still see people, you can't say to people, okay, well, you know, we're going to shut this service down. Obviously you can, but there are some services that have to keep going. I think that they're finding it more kind of controlled and stringent than.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But I also wanted to say that if you compare hospital to schools, in hospital apparently you need to have lots of rules because it's a very complex technological procedure. You know, if you have an operation or things like that.
The
so
consequences are bigger if things go wrong.
Yeah, but at the same time, the question is not having rules or not having rules, but can the rules be, you know, discussed? For example, the rules about how to have this protection, how do they make, who make them, who can object to them, can you, like, you know, give back your advice? So that's all the problems that is actually interesting to discuss in the framework of the how whole institution is built in.
Yeah, I
As
can't
far
see
as-
it happening.
As far as I'm aware, we get even the chief executive is getting their direction from government guidelines, and then that's passed down to us. And I think one of the interesting things that maybe has changed things is maybe the amount of money that the government have been able to put toward PPE, and that has changed about the way that PPE has been used, about whether PPE has been reused or can be reused, or and things like that. Or, you know, at first we were using visors, you know, these plastic visors, and at first we were told that they were one use only, and then it was that we could clean them down with certain wipes and we could reuse certain things. I think when that first happened, that freaked people out because they were like, right, what can we reuse and what can't we reuse? And again, it's the way that people interpret it. So, you know, there was a few weeks ago, there was a thing before we had to start wearing masks in the hospital on a non-clinical situation. So we started having to wear masks when we were on a ward or when we were in a clinic with a patient, but then when we were walking down corridors and doing things, we didn't have to wear masks. But then there were times that you were transferring a patient from a clinical setting from a clinic to X-ray. So essentially you're still working with the patient and you're taking them down to a corridor, and you're kind of like, well, why, when I'm walking down the corridor with the patient, do the other people that are in the corridor not have to wear a mask because all of a sudden we're all in the same place with the patient? So it gets really, it's like a vine growing the way that it wants to. It's scrambling.
It's a renegotiation of public and private space, isn't it? And it's constantly happening. I think that it was interesting from what you're saying is that you've got a consultant nurse on the ward, which sounds like the consultant nurse is probably going to different wards, right? And you've got the chief executive.
Well, in our setting, yes. So on most wards, so I guess so on most wards you would have a ward manager who is a sister who looks after the day-to-day running of the ward. In our case, we've got lead nurses, but we've got lead nurses in small departments, but then we have a consultant nurse who, ours is a very specialist area, so the service we perform isn't performed all over the country, and we're kind of a bit, the department that I'm in is kind of a unique department in the UK. Sort of other people come to us to look to see what they're doing. So our lead nurse is kind of, consultant nurse is kind of she leads everything for the service. So yeah, ultimately, if she wants to come in, you know, I guess it's like a head surgeon colorectal surgeon that works on the colorectal ward. If they wanted to come in and something be done a certain way, then I guess they could have.
Very interesting. So, but I think we should. We have to go now. So, but I think we already started to work on the on this. Working groups. I just wanted to quickly say what I wrote after you. So it's one of the things is a very idea of democratization of hospital is actually pretty new, and it's only the references is only some kind of revolutionary half militant, half artistic groups. And so I was thinking maybe in a working group we can discuss some concrete example. And like you were saying about PPE, how like, you know, it's very clear, it's very small things, but it's very clear if the system will be able to have a feedback of what actually going with the rules that they're, you know, making you implement, then it will readjust itself better. So, and everybody would see that it's actually really necessary to do. And then migration and hospital, that was Ali was saying, and that was people from Graz was saying too, that's like a very big deal because many of the care workers are migrants. Yeah, and then I would just maybe write privately to Fabian and do my own research about board games because I'm so fascinated about that. It's kind of
cool.
Yeah, that's so cool. Maybe we should do like, you know, parallel project with the board games.
So we'll have the
that would be very, yeah, I welcome that. That would be good.
Yeah. Okay.
Communist Hospital, the game.
Yeah, Communist Hospital, the game.
But I do regularly refer to the hospital as being a game of Tetris because it's about people coming in and then working
very rapidly in spaces,
getting them out and things. So the one thing that I was thinking today that you were talking about, most of it, I kept thinking it's like playing a game. It's like playing a board.
Oh. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So we guys see you in 2 weeks? Or
well, we're setting around the working group stuff.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Brilliant. Nice one. Cheers, guys.
All right, it's been really fun.
Wicked discussion. Yeah.
Bye.
See you in a bit.
Bye. Bye-bye.